It was staged as Baron Trump's ultimate triumph, a flawless 1600 SAT Golden Ivy League invitations and the swagger of untouchable privilege. But in an instant, Jasmine Crockett transforms Congress into a war zone, slamming down files that prove the game was rigged from the start. The chamber erupts, cameras blaze, and a nation holds its breath. How much of the Trump empire will survive once the lie explodes? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The congressional chamber burns under blinding lights, cameras locking onto every twitch, every breath. The silence is thick, the kind that makes hearts pound louder than words. It feels less like a hearing and more like a gladiator's arena, and the nation knows a battle is about to erupt. Barron Trump enters like a prince on parade, chin high, eyes cold, clutching a leather-bound folder like it holds the keys to destiny. His stride is slow, deliberate, each step echoing with arrogance. He halts before the microphone, lips curling, and proclaims, "I will prove my superior intellect today." The words crash like a hammer, sending gas rolling through the chamber. Across from him sits Jasmine Crockett, spine straight gaze unflinching, a thick stack of files before her. No glitter, no family name, only the hard steel of truth. She doesn't flinch, doesn't blink. Her stillness itself is a weapon. Barron leans and grins sharp as glass. Howard Law, he spits his second rate. "I scored a perfect 1600. I am the true intellect of this generation." The room explodes, half cheering, half seething. Every eye snapping to Jasmine, waiting for her strike. The roar of whispers still hangs in the air from Barron's first arrogant claim. And now the tension spikes higher as he leans into the microphone, his voice dripping with pride. "I studied at St. Andrews. My scores were always flawless. SAT 1600 beyond question. The Ivy League from Harvard to Princeton are all eager to welcome me." Meanwhile, Crockett here studied at some second-rate school, surviving only because of quota. His words land like punches, sharp and cruel, echoing across the chamber. For a moment, the chamber tips in his favor. Half the room claps. A few conservative lawmakers nod approvingly, and the air fills with smug laughter. The cameras shift instantly their lenses, hunting Jasmine Crockett's face. But she does not flinch. She sits still, her back straight, her expression carved from stone. While the chamber buzzes with Barron's bravado, her fingers quietly open a thick folder. Pages crackling like thunder in the silence that follows. She speaks calmly, each word landing like a strike. "You said 1600. The 2019, a Princeton review listed your name among students investigated for SAT fraud, tied directly to the Varsity Blue scandal. The very scandal that shook America when wealthy parents bought their children seats in the Ivy League. The room gasps. A giant screen flashes alive, and suddenly every eye is glued to the damning text. Trump Barron exam location, Special Center 2020. The letters blaze under the spotlight. Undeniable, unshakable, searing into the chamber. Gasps ripple like waves across the hall. Some people lean forward in shock, while others instinctively shake their heads, unable to believe the display. Barron's face turns crimson fury, twisting his jaw. He slams a hand down on the desk, his voice rising in a scream. "Fake news. I was never charged." His words crack in the air, desperate and panicked. A stark contrast to the polished arrogance he carried just minutes before. Jasmine doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. Calm and sharp, she fires back. "Correct. You were never charged. But the College Board's own records confirm that you took your exam in a private room with 50% more time and a shortened set of questions." Her voices steady the cadence, deliberate, as if each word were carved in stone. The cameras zoom in on her face, capturing the controlled fire in her eyes. A hush falls, followed by a wave of murmurs that feels like an earthquake. A journalist seated near the press bench leans toward his colleague, whispering into a hot mic that the whole chamber catches. This is exactly how the wealthy cheated back in 2019. Same playbook, different name. The whisper spreads like wildfire through social media in real-time hashtags, already forming on screens across the nation. The entire scandal begins to feel alive again. dragging the ghosts of Varsity Blues into this chamber. Barron rises in defiance, his voice cracking with rage and denial. I was given accommodations because I am exceptional. I was prioritized for excellence, not fraud. He jabs a finger toward Jasmine as though he can stab holes into her argument with sheer arrogance. His words echo, but they no longer ring with the confidence they carried at the start. Instead, they sound hollow, desperate, like a fortress wall already crumbling under siege. Jasmine turns toward the main camera, locking eyes, not only with Barron, but with the millions watching from their living rooms. Her words slice the air with precision. Exceptional, she repeats, her tone icy, or just another child of privilege. The line detonates, drawing gas, shouts in an uproar that forces the chair to pound the gavel again and again, again and again. The chamber trembles as if struck by a storm. For the first time, Barron's smirk falters completely, his composure splintering before the nation's eyes. Then Jasmine leans in her voice, low but fierce, and she throws history itself against him. Last year, the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action. They declared that every American student must compete on equal ground with no exceptions for race, no excuses, no special treatment. And yet here you are, sitting smugly boasting about a test. You took in a private room with extra time and a watered-down exam. Tell me, Barron, tell the American people, does that look like fairness to you? Her words hit harder than any dossier or file could. They bring the entire national debate crashing into the single moment. The chamber erupts into chaos. Some lawmakers pound their desks in outrage, while others shout in defense. Reporters hammer at their keyboards, the clicking rising like machine gun fire. Every network, every live stream, every trending feed explodes with Jasmine's line. Barron's name floods across screens in bold tied forever to the word privilege. The noise grows so deafening, the gavel strike seems powerless to contain it. Barron's face drains of color, his earlier confidence shattered. He opens his mouth to reply, but the words tangle in his throat, drowned by the roar of the chamber. His fists clench his body rigid, but the aura of invincibility is gone. Across from him, Jasmine sits steady, her calmness a sharp blade against his chaos. She has not shouted. She has not raged yet. She has dismantled him piece by piece in front of a nation. The camera cuts once more to Jasmine, her gaze still locked forward, unshaken by the storm she has unleashed. She tilts her head slightly, almost as if delivering a final verdict. This, she says quietly but firmly, is only the surface dust. There is more. So much more that when revealed will make sure you never dare to boast about intellect again. The words hang in the air, like a guillotine suspended, promising that the next strike will fall with finality. The chamber falls into stunned silence for just a moment, a pause before the next explosion. Reporters already rush out, tweets. Anchors whisper in earpieces, and the American public leans closer to their screens. And with that, the stage is set for the storm still to come. The chamber was still rattling from Jasmine's last strike when Barron suddenly shot to his feet, snapping open his leather folder with a flourish. The sound of paper tearing through silence felt almost theatrical. He yanked out a crisp sheet, the crimson crest of Harvard, blazing at the top, and raised it high above his head, so every camera could lock on. His voice thundered, half triumph, half vengeance. This is an official invitation from Harvard. They want me while Crockett has never even been glanced at by the Ivy League. The words boomed across the hall, and gasps turned into scattered applause. A ripple of approval rolled through the conservative benches. A few lawmakers nodded with smug pride as though Barron's brandished letter were their own trophy. The cameras zoomed in to capture every angle, the Harvard logo glowing under the harsh lights, a weapon meant to humiliate. Some spectators clapped from the gallery, their cheers sharp against the uneasy silence of the rest. For a fleeting moment, the balance of power seemed to tilt toward him. Barron's grin widened, his chest puffed like a soldier declaring victory. The lenses turned swiftly toward Jasmine. She sat motionless, her hands folded neatly over her own stack of files. Her face betrayed nothing. No anger, no panic. only an unreadable calm that cut deeper than any retort. Still, Barron pressed forward, unwilling to let silence steal his thunder. He leaned over the microphone, venom curling in his words. You got scholarships because they pied the working-class black community you came from. That isn't intelligence. That's charity. His sneer sharpened the insult into a blade meant to slice through her credibility. In one clean strike, a low rumble stirred in the chamber. Some gasped, some applauded, others simply shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, Barron's attack landed with weight, the kind that made even a few neutral faces twitch in uncertainty. On social media, the live stream chat lit up in real-time lines of text flying across screens. Maybe he's right. Jasmine looks cornered. Could she really be stuck? The narrative began to bend, pulling sympathy away from her, and into Barron's smug embrace. The gavel struck once, but the sound was drowned beneath the chatter, the laughter, the applause from Barron's allies. He stood taller, waving the letter like a flag of conquest, soaking in the moment. To the crowd, he looked untouchable, basking in Harvard's glow. And yet, when the cameras cut back to Jasmine, the silence surrounding her was louder than the noise drowning him. She slowly extended a hand, her fingertips brushing the edge of her folder, her eyes cold, unblinking. That small movement sent a shiver through the air. It was nothing a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of a storm forming on the horizon. She did not speak, not even a word. She let Barron's insults hang in the air unchallenged, and the silence pressed down heavier than shouting ever could. Every second she stayed quiet, the tension grew until the room itself seemed to lean toward her, waiting, dreading, anticipating. Viewers at home shifted in their seats, feeling the chills seep through their screens. Commentators whispered live on air. She hasn't answered yet, but look at her face. Barron, oblivious, mistook her silence for defeat. His smile spread wider, his hand clutching the Harvard letter like a sword raised above a vanquished foe. He thought he had cornered her, pinned her, broken her. But the truth was different. That silence was not weakness. It was a coiled spring waiting to snap. And when it did, Harvard's glow would shatter into dust. They didn't know. Jasmine still held an ace hidden in her files. And when it appeared, the Harvard letter would collapse into nothing but paper. The silence after Barron's taunt still lingers when Jasmine slowly rises from her chair. The room tilts toward her as if every eye knows something is coming. She lifts her chin, her voice sharp and steady, every word striking like steel on stone. "These are my real achievements," she declares, her hand resting firmly on the folder before her. LSAT 170 out of 180. Graduated Howard Law. Top 5% National Moot Court Champion 2016. The words ricochet off the walls of the chamber, undeniable solid, carved into the air for all to hear. The giant screens above flicker to life, filling the room with images of Jasmine holding the Moot Court trophy, her smile radiant, her arms raised in victory. The audience bursts into applause, the sound rolling like thunder across the chamber. Some lawmakers pound their deaths in approval, their voices mixing with the cheers. Cameras zoom in, catching the electricity in her eyes. The strength in her stance, she doesn't bask in it, she commands it. For the first time, Barron's crown of arrogance begins to crack. Her gaze slices toward him, cold and unrelenting. "What do you have?" she demands, her voice ringing across the chamber. "Besides a letter you cannot verify, a published paper, an academic award, or is it only the Trump name propping you up?" The questions hit like hammer blows, each one heavier than the last. Barron stiffens his throat, working as he struggles to form words. The smug grin is gone, replaced by a nervous twitch of the jaw. The crowd leans forward, waiting for his reply, but the silence exposes him more than any insult ever could. Finally, he blurts out his voice, forced shaky but desperate. "I am still young. I have time. I studied at St. Andrews, one of the finest schools in the nation. A place you would never have set foot in." He clings to the words like a shield raising St. Andrews, as if the school itself could save him. For a fleeting second, a handful of allies nod, clapping softly, trying to resurrect his confidence. But the sound is hollow, drowned by the weight of the evidence Jasmine has already unleashed. Her answer comes swift, cutting deeper than a blade. "You were born at St. Andrews," she fires back, her voice cold as ice. But even there, you needed the crutch of a VIP room just to take a test. While you were handed every advantage, I came from a public school in Texas, and I still stood in the national court and won. The words detonate like dynamite, ripping through Barron's defenses. The contrast is undeniable. A collision of privilege and grit. The screens show Jasmine in a packed courtroom delivering arguments before a panel of judges, while a caption flashes, "National Moot Court Champion, 2016. The chamber explodes. Applause erupts like a wave crashing against stone. Lawmakers rise to their feet, clapping, hard voices roaring in support. Spectators shout Jasmine's name from the gallery, the sound shaking the chamber walls. Reporters type furiously, their fingers blurring over keyboards as headlines form in real time. Crockett slams Barron with real achievements. Privilege versus merit live on screen. The energy is unstoppable. A tide sweeping over Barron, drowning him in humiliation. Barron lowers his head, his shoulders stiff, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turn white. The letter from Harvard, once his shining weapon, now hangs limp in his hand. He can feel the camera zooming in on his defeat, the nation watching every flicker of his shame. He swallows hard, but there is no comeback, no line to erase the sting of Jasmine's truth. Every breath he takes feels heavier, every second longer, as if the entire chamber is pressing down on him. Across the room, Jasmine doesn't gloat. She doesn't need to. Her stillness is victory enough. Her words, her achievements, her truth, they echo louder than applause, resonating with every parent watching at home, every student dreaming of fairness, every American tired of privilege masquerading as merit. She has drawn the line clear, and the country sees it. The noise refuses to die down, building and swelling as if the chamber itself is alive. The chair pounds the gavel, but order doesn't return. It doesn't matter. The truth has already been carved into the moment, and Barron cannot erase it. His legacy of arrogance collapses under the weight of one woman's undeniable record. Jasmine's eyes lock back on him, calm, certain, merciless. And then, with a voice steady as judgment, she delivers the promise that makes the chamber fall silent again. But the next evidence will not be words or transcripts. It will be flesh and blood, a living witness who will end the charade once and for all. The silence that follows is suffocating. The audience leans forward, hearts pounding, knowing the storm is not over. The cameras freeze on Barron's face, pale and tense, as if he already senses what's coming. The threat of that witness still hangs in the air as the chair slams the gavel. It cracks like thunder as he demands order, but the crowd won't settle in the hot, nervous air. Barron whips around to his attorney, face tight and flushed. She has nothing, just flaunting old transcripts. His voice is too loud, the kind that betrays fear more than confidence. The microphones catch it, and the words ricochet off the marble walls and into living rooms nationwide. The lawyer leans in jaw-clenched eyes, flicking toward Jasmine's thick binder. But she hasn't opened all her files yet. Be careful. The warning crawls under Barron's skin, soaring his smirk. Out in the corridor, cameras stream non-stop lights, strobing against the seal of Congress, and boom mics sway over frantic producers. Sources say Jasmine is about to call a special witness. The phrase repeats across feeds, multiplying like sparks leaping from wire to wire, igniting headlines before anyone can breathe. Producers in the press corral bark into headsets, stacking B-roll and bold captions in real time. Clip reels of Barron, waving the Harvard letter loop on dozens of screens. In corridors, interns sprint with fresh printouts. A red light blinks live over every doorway. Commentators sharpen their talking points, calling this the turning point, and Crockett stall. The gallery hums with the thrill of momentum, a crowd drawn to the shine of a crest. Yet at the center desk, Jasmine's silence keeps swallowing the noise like a tide that refuses to recede. Barron pushes back his chair and rises the scrape. Shrill and defiant, he pivots toward the aisle, shoulders squared as if the exit itself could erase the last 10 minutes and the shame gathering around him like smoke. "He's running!" The shout from the gallery detonates, rolling through the chamber. The lawyer snags Barron's sleeve and yanks hard, forcing him back into the chair. Barron's hands tremble with rage, tendons tight, the Harvard letter crumpling in his fist. Security shifts position along the walls, palms hovering near earpieces as the volume surges again. The chair warns for order, voice, but the adrenaline will not obey. Barron's lawyer leans closer, murmuring data points and PR lines that sound thinner by the second. Barron stares straight ahead, jaw-hammering sweat bright at his hairline. The Harvard seal creasing under his grip. A clock ticks over the chamber door each second, dragging like a chain on concrete. Somewhere, a camera red light glows brighter, as if sensing what everyone else now fears. The chair hammers the gavel again, trying to staple the chaos to the floor. Reporters type in bursts, while Jasmine stays motionless, one palm on her, her eyes locked on the door. The cameras follow her gaze, lenses tunneling toward the threshold as the noise sinks to a charged hush. Every heartbeat in the room seems to stall at once. And then the door opens. The person who enters carries living proof no one can deny. The heavy air of the chamber seemed to shift when the door opened. Every head turned, every camera lens swung toward the man who stepped inside. He looked ordinary, a middle-aged teacher in a plain gray suit. But the folder in his hand gave him the weight of a hammer about to fall. His name was Daniel Whitaker, a long-serving teacher from St. Andrew's Episcopal School, the very place Barron once boasted about. The hush that followed his steps made the moment feel like a trial where the final witness had arrived. Whitaker walked with careful strides, climbed into the witness chair, and raised his hand to swear the oath. His face was pale but firm, his jaw set with the seriousness of someone who knew the truth would burn. He leaned toward the microphone and spoke clearly. "I was the proctor for the SAT in 2020 at St. Andrews. I received instructions from school management. Those instructions told me to put Barron Trump in a private testing room, to give him 50% more time than other students, and to use a shortened version of the exam. What I have here is a printed copy of that message." He held up a sheet of paper, and the technician rushed to project it on the large screens. The words appeared in bold at the top. "Special accommodation, Trump family." The chamber froze. Every line of the message was plain and sharp. It directed Whitaker to remove Barron from the standard testing hall, to provide a private room to extend his time by half, and to issue him an alternate, reduced set of questions. The instructions went further, stating that Barron's name should not appear in the normal seating log, and that he should not be allowed to interact with other students before or after the exam. The reaction was instant. Gasps tore through the audience. A low roar rose from the gallery as people pointed at the screen in disbelief. Journalists fired questions into the air, their fingers racing across keyboards to push breaking alerts onto phones across America. On live television, the phrase "special accommodation, Trump family" scrolled across tickers as anchors interrupted coverage with breaking news banners. The chamber no longer felt like a hearing. It felt like an earthquake. Barron's face lost all color just minutes before he had waved his Harvard letter like a crown. Now he sat frozen, his knuckles white around the crumpled paper, his breath coming fast and shallow. He turned to his lawyer, eyes wide, but the man lowered his gaze and said nothing. The Harvard crest on the letter looked pitiful against the cold, glowing words on the giant screen. The difference between pride and proof had never been so clear. Whitaker's voice broke through the chaos. Calm but cutting. "I followed the instructions, exactly as written. The room assigned was separate from the other students. The timing sheet I was given allowed 1.5 times the standard period. The exam booklet carried a special code. I logged the times as instructed, and I reported back to management. I did not ask for these rules. I was told to carry them out. And now I'm telling you the truth." His words were not dramatic. They didn't need to be. The simplicity made them stronger. The chamber fell into a strange rhythm, alternating between uproar and silence. Each time the gavel slammed, the noise died only for the weight of the evidence to crush harder. Jasmine Crockett didn't move, her hands resting on her folder, her eyes locked on the screen. She didn't need to speak. Daniel Whitaker had spoken for her, and the country understood. Spectators leaned forward, their faces lit by the glaring text. Reporters whispered one phrase into their cameras and microphones smoking gun. The silence that followed stretched long. Barron's lips parted, but no sound came. His lawyer pressed a hand against his arm. A clear signal. Do not speak. There was nothing to say. The record was in black and white, undeniable, captured for history. The Harvard letter that once seemed powerful now looked like a prop. A fragile piece of theater already torn apart. On the big screen, the words refused to fade. Special accommodation. Trump family. The phrase glared down from every angle. A mirror of privilege laid bare. This was not rumor. This was not commentary. It was a written directive. A paper trail proving that Barron Trump had been given an advantage no ordinary student could dream of. The very school he used as a weapon of prestige had now become the stage of his humiliation. Whitaker lowered the paper back into his folder. His duty finished. He looked directly at the chair, his voice steady as he concluded. That is exactly what happened. The chamber held its breath, the truth pressing down like a weight no one could lift. The email still glowed on the screen when the room fell into a tense, eerie silence. Barron sat frozen, his jaw slack, his eyes wide and unfocused. The once cocky smirk had drained away, leaving a hollow mask of disbelief. He tried to shift in his seat, but even that small movement betrayed the tremor in his hands. For the first time, the cameras captured not the air of privilege, but a boy cornered, powerless under the weight of his own truth. The silence was louder than any gavel strike. Jasmine rose from her chair with deliberate calm, her voice steady yet sharp enough to slice through the heavy air. She didn't raise her tone, but every syllable carried the gravity of a verdict. This is not a story about test scores, she declared, her eyes locked on Barron. This is a story about fairness. Children of working families study night after night, fighting for every single point while you sat in a private room with extra time and a watered-down exam. Her words thundered, not because she shouted, but because they rang with a truth that could not be denied. The gallery erupted in gasps and murmurs, some shouting approval, others stunned into silence. The chair struck the gavel hard, yet even that pounding sounded like an echo compared to Jasmine's words. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, typing furiously, knowing they had just heard the line that would dominate headlines. The phrase "story about fairness" would be etched across banners and splashed on front pages by morning. Barron, head bowed, offered nothing. His silence was the loudest admission of all. The chair cleared his throat, his face stern as he leaned into the microphone. The record will reflect this testimony. The files, including the witness statement and exhibits, will be referred to the Department of Justice. His words struck like a hammer blow, sealing the moment into history. For a beat, the room stayed frozen, the decision sinking in. Then, like a dam bursting, the entire chamber surged to its feet. Applause rolled like thunder, shaking the very walls. Some lawmakers clapped until their palms turned red. Spectators shouted Jasmine's name, their voices rising above the storm. The cameras swept the chamber, capturing the split-reality Jasmine, standing tall, unflinching in the center of the storm. And Barron slumped low, a shadow of his former arrogance. Slowly, almost unwillingly, Barron pushed himself from his seat. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't face the crowd. He bowed his head, lifted a hand to shield his face, and stumbled toward the exit. The image was broadcast instantly, the privileged sun retreating under the weight of exposure. It spread in real time, becoming what commentators would later call the icon of defeat. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks as the door closed behind him. But the noise did not die. Instead, the focus shifted. Journalists shouted Jasmine's name, their voices urgent, desperate to catch her first words. She gathered her papers with care, slid them into her folder, and walked toward the exit with steady steps. The crowd parted for her, a corridor of flashing lights and outstretched microphones. Her composure never faltered, even as the room quacked with energy. When she stepped into the bright marble hallway of the Capitol, the outside world swallowed her. A wall of cameras exploded in flashes, their light bouncing off every polished surface. Reporters shouted her name again and again. Congresswoman Crockett, over here, the defender of fairness, the voice of the people. Their words chased her like echoes of triumph. Security pushed back the crowd, but the images were already captured. Jasmine against a wall of flashing lights, her calm face lit by the glow, her figure framed as the symbol of justice. She didn't shout, didn't wave, didn't grandstand. She simply paused at the podium, hastily set for press, and let the storm rage around her. The questions were a blur, shouted over one another, each journalist desperate to claim the first headline. And yet none of that mattered, because the cameras had already seized the moment they needed. Jasmine Crockett, walking out of Congress into the blaze of light, her head held high, would forever be remembered as the woman who confronted privilege and stood for fairness. The chamber behind her still buzzed. The gallery still hummed. But outside the Capitol, the narrative had already taken shape. On every screen, on every channel, in every headline, one phrase repeated: the defender of educational fairness. The hallway outside the Capitol doors swells like a tidal rush. The moment Jasmine steps into the light and the story surges with it. News tickers ignite in red across every network, pushing out regular programming as anchors lock into breaking cadence. On split screens, the chamber clip plays on loop, while the lower third stamps a single line bold and unforgiving SAT's secret Trump privilege exposed. The phrase ricochets from television to tablet to phone, replicated on front-page mock-ups and mobile alerts within minutes. Producers cue dramatic stings, editors cut fast, tight montages, and the country leans forward as if the next breath might carry an answer to something bigger than one hearing. The narrative is simple, sharp, and impossible to ignore. In living rooms from small-town Ohio to South Texas, parents rise from couches with a shock that turns quickly to anger. Phone lines at local stations blink alive as callers vent through tears and grit. A mother in Scranton grips the receiver so hard, her knuckles blanch, and says, "My child was rejected for missing 10 points, while Barron got 50% extra time." Another parent emails a newsroom describing nights spent timing practice sections at the kitchen table and Saturdays lost to test prep. A father posts his son's score report beside the headline and asks how a private room and an easier test could ever be called fair. The outrage spills over school pickup lines, union meetings, and crowded diner counters where coffee turns cold while the story heats. Parent-teacher associations draft emergency statements, and counselors compose careful letters to seniors who feel cheated before their applications even ship. On-talk radio hosts mute their theme music and let parents tell the long, familiar story of scraping for every advantage that money cannot buy. Community Facebook groups switch from bake sale reminders to scanned screenshots of the hearings circled in red with blunt captions. This is why it feels rigged. A coalition of immigrant families calls a press conference in a church hall where folding chairs fill fast, and a grandfather with a soft voice says he worked 2 jobs so his granddaughter could take tutoring. He never had, and he will not watch her faith in the system evaporate. The phrase from the Chiron drifts into everyday speech, and in a single afternoon exposed becomes a verb people aim like an arrow at privilege. On the campuses that symbolize the gates of opportunity, the energy turns kinetic. Harvard Yard, crowds thicken by noon as students pour from dorms with handmade signs and megaphones. The chant builds from a cluster to a chorus that rolls against George Washington's statue and over the brick path's fair admissions. Now the phrase prints itself onto banners draped from dorm windows, sprayed onto bed sheets, stretched between trees, and traced on poster board and block letters that read from 2 quads away. At Yale Cross Campus thrums with drums and stomps, the chant threading through Gothic arches until even people on library steps mount the words. Faculty peer through office windows, then step outside to watch a generation that came of age, and fractured pandemics and expensive internships decide that this here is the line. Campus police keep distance as student marshals usher crowds along agreed routes, pointing to water stations and taping off paths so wheelchairs move freely. A professor from a first-generation initiative holds a small sign and claps in rhythm tears, bright as a student reporter interviews her for the evening package. A delegation crosses to the admissions office and leaves a letter stamped with the day's demand, signed by thousands in digital ink gathered in a few breathless hours. Tour groups stop mid-spell while parents raise their phones to record a protest that will live longer than the brochures in their hands. The chant does not fade. It reorganizes, swelling with each call and response until some part of the campus memory shifts to make room for it. On Capitol Hill, staffers pin fresh witness lists to corkboards and route draft memos up the chain as lawmakers switch from clipped hallway quotes to full-throated statements. Committee chairs announce that special sessions will examine standardized testing practices, oversight of accommodations, and the relationship between private schools and national testing bodies. In hearing rooms, A's align nameplates and refill water pictures as networks mark their calendars for the next live feeds. A senior senator speaking to cameras without stepping fully to the podium promises subpoenas where cooperation fails and data where rumors once stood. Across the aisle, a ranking member, careful measured, says the process must be thorough and must protect students who need real accommodations even as it roots out abuse. The gavel has not yet fallen, but the docket has begun to fill. Back in the Studios panel shows cancel planned segments and swap in education experts, student advocates, and ethicists who stitch context around the headline. Producers reopen control room walls to add screens so they can monitor simultaneous rallies, parent interviews, and committee calendars. A veteran anchor turns from the teleprompter and looks directly into the lens to frame the day. In plain terms, a paper trail, a private room, and a public reckoning. Editorial boards rush statements to the web, ranging from cautious to blistering, while local columns argue that a fair system should be hard enough to trust and simple enough to explain to a teenager. The scandal stops being only a scandal. It becomes a useful mirror in which millions suddenly recognize the shape of something they have long felt but rarely seen so clearly. Amid the noise, one image gains traction with unusual speed. Jasmine Crockett, mid-stride on the Capitol steps, her file under one arm, eyes forward as the flashbulbs burst. A magazine social feed frames her photo with a stark caption. The woman who dared to confront privilege, and the words attached to her name, like a banner in a parade, no one can disperse. Morning shows Splicer floor speech with the email subject line, and a parent's single-sentence testimony. A triangulation that explains the day in 3 precise beats. High school debate teams pin her quotes to corkboards. Student government pages post clips for incoming freshmen to watch before their first meeting. The moniker travels beyond politics into culture because people crave a title for the feeling of watching someone stand unshaken when the wind is against her. Jasmine moves through the crush with the same economy she carried at the witness table. She declines the loudest microphones but stops for the students in campus sweatshirts who have stood all afternoon in the sun. She thanks a nurse still in scrubs who drove across town after a double shift to hold a sign high enough to be seen over a crowd. She tells a teacher clutching a manila folder of recommendation letters that the fight is specific and structural, not sentimental, and that specificity is how systems change. When a reporter shouts a question about whether she wants to be a symbol, she answers that symbols are most useful when they point to the work. She repeats the simple sentence that anchored the day so it can survive the edit. This is a story about fairness. Evening falls and the story finds its second wind as a night cruise thread live hits into primetime slots. Helicopter shots trace the glow of rallies still ongoing, their chants softer but steadier in the dark. An anchor reads viewer messages in real time. A grandmother who says she finally understands why her granddaughter cried over a number. A veteran who asked to volunteer for the next hearing day. Digital producers assemble a timeline graphic that starts with a leather folder raised to the lights and ends with a subject line no one can unsee. Analysts argue over policy paths, but the audience, knitted together by a headline and a chant, knows exactly what it wants to say out loud. The country has learned the phrase and refuses to put it down. Fair admissions. Now, by midnight, front pages are locked, and the headline's echo lingers in empty newsrooms where coffee cools beside marked-up proofs. Parents set alarms for work, but leave the television on mute, watching the crawl for committee updates as if the screen might offer guarantees. Students text meeting times for tomorrow's teachings and share links to public comment portals that have begun to flood. On the Capitol calendar, placeholders become formal entries under the stark title Standardized Testing Oversight. The city quiets by degrees, but the story does not sleep. It waits in the glow of screens for the next gavel, the next chant, the next unblinking camera. And through it all, one line, simple and exact, keeps the pulse steady. Sad secret privilege exposed. The noise outside the Capitol fades into a steadier hum, and the story moves from marble hallways into living rooms, school parking lots, and break rooms where people watch the clip on cracked phones. The headline scrolls again and again, but what grips the country now is not a slogan. It is the question at the heart of it all. Parents who have worked overtime for years feel something they cannot swallow any longer. They replay Jasmine's words in the email on the screen and think of kitchen tables covered in flashcards. The anger is sharp, but under it there is a fragile, stubborn hope. If the truth can be dragged into daylight, maybe fairness can follow it through the door. And so the country listens as ordinary voices begin to speak clearly. A mother in a union t-shirt sits at the edge of her couch, a stack of practice tests still rubber-banded on the coffee table. She points at the screen and says, "My son missed by 10 points, and he cried into a pillow so his sister would not hear." The words come out flat at first, then warmer, then hot. She explains how they time sections with a kitchen timer between double shifts, how they turned off the air conditioner so the apartment stayed quiet, how he did laps in the hallway to keep his heart from shaking. He did not ask for extra time, she says. He asked for a fair shot. In a warehouse break room, a father with a forklift badge pinches the bridge of his nose, eyes red from dust, and a night shift that ended at dawn. He says he sold his old guitar to pay for a used laptop because the school one kept freezing in the last 5 minutes of the practice exam. He says he drove his daughter to a test site 40 miles away because their school seats filled in 5 minutes at sign-up. "We were short by 10, he tells the local reporter, who stopped by the loading dock. 10 points that felt like a wall, and now I hear someone else got another half the time and a smaller wall. He looks at the camera and says nothing more because there is nothing left to add. Across town, a nurse still in scrubs stands outside her apartment with a stethoscope looped in her pocket and a sandwich in her hand. She talks about charting patients at midnight, ironing a shirt at 2, and quizzing her daughter at 3, because the shift calendar does not care about test dates. "I begged for a Saturday morning schedule," she says, "but the floor was short and people were sick." She smiles and then breaks, covering her eyes. "My girl got up anyway. She did not ask for pity. We do not want pity. We want one set of rules that no one can buy." At a school auditorium that still smells like last month's theater show paint rows of folding chairs fill for an emergency parent meeting. A translator outlines the clip in 2 languages and hands go up all at once. One parent says they will bring water for the next practice test day. Another offers to watch toddlers in the gym during study hours so older siblings can focus. A grandfather in a VFW cap stands and says, "We are not asking for a handout. We are asking for a fair start." The room answers with applause that feels like a promise. Beyond the cities, the story rolls into counties where the nearest testing site is a long bus ride, and the internet cuts out when the rain comes hard. A student from the coal hills of Appalachia records a video on a borrowed phone and tells the world how she studied on a porch because the signal was strongest there. She talks about working weekends at a diner, counting tips and pages, keeping flashcards in her apron pocket between orders. I learned the words by saying them out loud over the sink. Says, I want to build bridges, not just in books. When she says she watched Jasmine hold her ground and felt the floor under her feet rise, thousands share the clip. On a reservation high school gym floor, a junior tapes a number line to the free throw lane and shows younger students how to check their work while the heater rattles. He says the school got a grant for calculators, but the batteries died the week before the test, and they used the sun for light on the bus. People think we are not trying, he says. We are trying every day. He smiles shilly when someone asks why he cares so much and answers, because I want my little brother to see that our road is long, not blocked. He ends the video with a fist to his chest and a quiet, thank you to Jasmine. In a dusty farm town by the border, a senior who wakes before dawn to help stack crates speaks into a cracked laptop camera. She describes studying between harvest shifts, flipping through grammar notes with hands that smell like earth and diesel. I did not complain, she says. I thought the rules were the rules. She pauses, her eyes bright. Then I saw that email, she adds, and I heard someone in that big room say, we deserve fairness. I am going to apply anyway. Her classmates sign her poster, Fair Admissions Now. A group chat of first-gen students from scattered rural schools renames itself Crockett's Class. They share links to fee waivers, ride shares to test sites, and quiet library corners that do not kick people out when the lights flicker. One posts a clip of Jasmine saying this is a story about fairness, and another pins it to the top. When one student texts that he is thinking of giving up a dozen replies, arrive, do not quit. We are still in this. She looked the system in the eye. The chat becomes a lighthouse in a low, cold fog. The story reaches the old stone walls of the schools at the center of the debate. And inside those walls, doors open that usually stay shut. In a small seminar room lined with portraits, a tenure professor folds her hands and chooses candor over comfort. There has been pressure to accept donor kids, she says. The words come slowly at first, then steady. We are told to be flexible when a last name arrives with a pledge. We are told to consider growth opportunities when a building needs repair. She looks into the camera. It corrodes the trust we need to teach. In another building where polished floors reflect a century of footsteps and admissions, officer speaks without her name on the screen. Sometimes the term is development admit. She says sometimes it is institutional priority. The language changes, but the meaning does not. She describes spreadsheets with notes and columns that are not test scores, or essays and calls that come at the end of a cycle, with questions that are not questions. We have amazing students, she says, voice tight at the edges. But we also have a shadow system that no one wants to say out loud. A faculty meeting that was supposed to be routine turns into something sharper. Hands go up and do not go down as junior scholars ask why they must defend grading curves to students in office hours, while a different curve seems to exist at the campus gate. A senior historian says plainly, a score is not a checkbook. A scientist who runs a lab reminds the room that research thrives when no one doubts the ground rules. If you want people to accept hard feedback, she says you must show them you accept hard limits. The room hums with that sentence long after the meeting ends. On the quad, a literature professor reads the email subject line projected on a screen and tells his class that stories are not only invented, they are also recorded. A memo can be a story, he says, because it tells who matters and how. He asked the seniors to write 2 paragraphs. One about a time. A door opened. One about a time a door closed. Several write about application portals, deadline timers, and a number that felt like a stamp. When they circle their chairs to read aloud, the room is quiet enough to hear the clock and the soft turn of pages. The parents who spoke with anger do not end in anger alone. A round table in a public library meets on a Tuesday evening and lowers the temperature on purpose. They draw a circle on a whiteboard and write 3 words inside, clear, equal, honest. A coach suggests test proctors be rotated between schools to prevent cozy arrangements. A bookkeeper says every accommodation should be publicly tracked by category with reasons that pass the blush test. A bus driver says test sites should be as common as polling places because both are about voice. The group nods and writes it down. Stories from the fields and the hills carry something harder than rage resolve. A student council in a rural district passes a resolution that asks the state to fund better internet where the roads drown and the lines sag. A debate captain sends a polite, pointed letter to the superintendent asking for buses on the 3 national test days, not just the first. A school board votes to make the gym a study hall on weeknights with a volunteer rotating watch. None of it is glamorous. All of it is real. Inside the schools, with old gates and new money, the confessions bring more than apologies. They bring proposals. A committee drafts a rule that any institutional priority must be disclosed in aggregate, not in rumor. Another group argues that legacy preference should be suspended until the playing field is measured with honest tools. A dean says merit is not a single number and should never be reduced to a check. But fairness, she adds, requires standards you can explain with a straight face. Students copy that line into their notes. And yet, the day is not only about rules. It is also about the human ground under them. A father who clocks in before sunrise says democracy does not live in the marble it lives in. Whether his child believes the test in front of her is the same test someone else is taking across town. A teacher in a public school says she can ask for excellence from her class if the world asks for integrity from its gatekeepers. A priest in a small parish says faith is not a curve. It is a promise. Everyone in the circle understands that none of these sentences needs a partisan label to make sense. The students who spoke from porches and bus seats keep the drumbeat simple. We are not asking to move the finish line, one says into a council microphone. We are asking to start at the same line. A teammate beside him adds, we will do the work. Heads around the table nod. Someone records minutes on a school. Minutes on a school. Laptop with a cracked hinge. The video of the meeting gets a few thousand views, but the next day, the library is full. The work in every sense has begun. By evening, the national conversation has a strange calm at its core. It is the calm that settles in after a storm when the sky is still, not because nothing happened, but because everything did. Commentators who usually shout talk in normal voices. They explain how accommodations matter for students who truly need them and must be protected with care and dignity, and how fake accommodations steal from those students first. A moderator closes a segment by repeating Jasmine's sentence the way a judge reads a charge. This is a story about fairness. Parents tuck children into bed and tell them the same thing they told them yesterday, only now with a stronger backbone. Work hard, be kind, ask hard questions. They add one more line they did not know they would say last week. We will make sure the rules are real. The children nod and do not fully grasp it, but they hear the tone and they will remember it later when they sit at a desk and the room goes quiet. The students who found each other online keep sending small, bright messages. I finished 3 sections. The bus is set. I asked the librarian for extra hours. Someone posts a quote card with Jasmine facing forward and the words, "The woman who dared to confront privilege." Under it, a plain sentence, "Keep going." It is not a rallying cry. It is a road sign. Faculty who spoke behind blurred frames meet again in person and decide to put their names on a letter. The first draft is clumsy. The second is better. The third is clean. It says the university must be a place where talent does not have to borrow a last name to enter, where need is met without fraud, where standards are high enough to honor the work and clear enough to be trusted. If we cannot defend the gate, the letter reads, "We cannot defend the garden." They send it before anyone loses courage. By nightfall, the lesson has settled where it belongs. Not in a headline, but in people's bones. Fairness in education is not a favor. It is not a perk. It is not a ribbon cut by someone with a famous name. It is the ground under the feet of a democracy that asks its children to study, to show up, to try again, and to believe that effort means something when the bell rings. If that ground cracks the building above it, schools, courts, votes, shakes. If that ground holds everything built upon it stands taller, And so the day's chorus closes on a line that a parent, a student, a teacher, and a senator could all say without changing a word. Fairness in education is not a privilege. It is the foundation of democracy. The years did not erase the shock of the hearing. Instead, they carved it deeper, layer by layer, into the national memory. What had once been breaking news and flashing tickers slowly hardened into a case study that professors used to open their classes. The phrase "sat secret" shifted from a headline to a chapter title. In sociology lectures across the country, the footage played at the start of the semester. Barron waving his Harvard letter. Jasmine calmly opening her folder, the subject line, "Special Accommodation." Trump family lighting the screen, and the moment when silence cracked into applause. Students watched the clip like an initiation, right? Their notebooks already open. Professors didn't have to explain why it mattered. The clip explained itself. Textbooks placed the hearing alongside the great social reckonings of American history. Some framed it next to Brown vs. Board of Education, the case that declared segregation unconstitutional. Others compared it to the college admissions scandal of 2019, the Varsity Blues affair, but emphasized that SAT secret was not about celebrities. It was about power itself. Classroom discussions stretched late as students debated privilege, fairness, and the line between accommodation and fraud. Professors asked simple questions. What does fairness look like? Who pays the cost of privilege? The answers spilled into essays, debates, and eventually dissertations. The hearing had become a mirror for a generation, still wrestling with the meaning of equality. The impact went far beyond the classroom walls. Universities shaken by the public fury were forced to look inward. Admissions offices rewrote policies with blunt new language. Legacy preference was stripped from many applications, no longer an unspoken advantage for the wealthy. Donor influence was curbed under strict transparency rules, requiring schools to disclose how much weight financial contributions carried. Most importantly, the SAT and ACT themselves faced a reckoning. Proctors rotated between schools to prevent cozy arrangements, and every accommodation granted had to be logged publicly in anonymized data sets. The message was clear. Accommodations were for students who needed them, not for names with power. State legislators passed laws requiring test sites to be as accessible as polling places open and distributed, so rural and urban students faced the same chances. Buses were funded to carry students to exams free of charge. Internet subsidies ensured that practice materials didn't vanish with a storm. For the first time, parents who had once whispered about unfairness felt the system bend toward them. It wasn't perfect, but it was moving. And when reporters asked what had triggered such sweeping changes, lawmakers gave the same answer: the Crockett hearing. Abroad, the story became more than American scandal. Newspapers in Europe, Asia, and Africa ran features with headlines like, "America faces its privilege problem in education and a reckoning at the Capitol." Editorials that had once mocked U.S. inequality now cautiously praised the reforms. Delegations from other nations visited Washington not to criticize but to learn. Scandinavian ministers cited SHATTERS, secret in their debates on balancing merit with equity. South American reformers invoke Jasmine's name in rallies for public funding. Even in countries where American politics was often dismissed, the story resonated because it wasn't about Democrats or Republicans. It was about fairness, the universal promise every parent makes to a child. The face of Barron Trump lingered as the counterpoint. For years, his image appeared in lectures, slideshows, and documentaries, not as the prodigy he once claimed to be, but as the cautionary tale of what happens when privilege overreaches. The still photo of him leaving the chamber, head down hand, shielding his face, became iconic. Students recognized it instantly as familiar as the image of Nixon boarding the helicopter after resignation. In interviews, former classmates described the weight he carried afterward, how the letter once brandished as triumph had turned into a symbol of hollow victory. Barron had become the living example of how privilege, when exposed, could collapse under its own arrogance. Jasmine Crockett's name, by contrast, grew brighter with time. Articles called her the torch of fairness, a phrase first coined by a high school journalist that caught fire and stuck. Biographies traced her journey from defending the poor in courtrooms to defending fairness on the national stage. Documentaries replayed the scene in slow motion, her rising from her chair, her calm voice cutting through Barron's fury, the gavel pounding while the crowd erupted. Students painted her image on protest banners, her silhouette holding a folder against a wall of flashing lights. In classrooms, professors ended their lectures with her words, "This is not about scores. This is about fairness." For millions, she was no longer just a congresswoman. She was the symbol that justice could still burn in the halls of power. Years later, when the Smithsonian unveiled an exhibit titled Privilege and Fairness in American Education, the centerpiece was not a desk or a gavel. It was Jasmine's folder donated to history. The placard beneath it read, "The torch of fairness evidence that changed a nation." Visitors leaned in some, whispering the words of the folder's most famous occupant, special accommodation, Trump family. Parents pointed it out to their children the way earlier generations had pointed to suffragist banners or civil rights photographs. It had become part of the lineage of American justice proof that education was not immune to struggle. Even late-night comedians, years after the hearing, still drew laughs by recalling Barron's broken defense. "I was given accommodations because I am exceptional." Audiences groaned and laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of the shared memory of watching arrogance collapse in real time. The laughter was edged with relief. The story had ended not in despair, but in reform. It had become a shorthand joke, yes, but also a national lesson carved deep enough to survive the spin of time. In small classrooms, professors asked their students to reflect on the meaning of the scandal. A freshman in sociology wrote, "Privilege is not always loud. Sometimes it is hidden in extra time on a test." A senior preparing for law school wrote, "The Crockett hearing showed that rules matter most when they apply to everyone." A teacher in a rural district taped Jasmine's quote to the wall. This is a story about fairness. For years, those words lived above chalkboards and whiteboards, a daily reminder that justice was not abstract. It was specific, measurable, and lived. By the 10th anniversary of the hearing poll showed that most Americans could recall where they were when they first saw the clip. It joined the roster of where were you moments that define generations. Parents remembered the sting of unfairness. Students remembered the chants, fair admissions. Now teachers remembered the confessions of donor pressure. And everyone remembered the look on Barron's face when the email appeared on screen. The reforms were not perfect. Loopholes remained, battles continued, and debates flared. But the direction of the tide was unmistakable. Students who had once believed the system was stacked now believed it could be fought. Parents who had once kept their frustrations quiet now demanded data and transparency. And every time the subject arose, Jasmine's name returned, glowing like a steady flame. Her final words from that hearing were quoted on plaque syllabi, and even etched into a stone at the entrance of Howard Law Scores can be bought. But justice and truth never can. The sentence was repeated in classrooms, speeches, and graduations. It was written on posters, chanted in rallies, and printed on the inside covers of textbooks. It was the distilled essence of the entire saga. The legacy of SHATTERS' secret was not a scandal locked in the past. It was a warning, a lesson, and a torch. For some, it was the story of a boy who fell under the weight of a name. For others, it was the story of a congresswoman who refused to blink. But for the country, it was the story that reminded everyone of the foundation beneath democracy itself. Fairness in education was not a luxury. It was not an exception. It was not a prize reserved for the powerful. It was the promise that if you worked to study and hoped the rules would not shift beneath your feet. That promise had been shaken, but it had also been restored. And so the story closed not with despair, but with clarity echoing in classrooms, courtrooms, and living rooms for generations. "Scores can be bought," Jasmine said that day, her voice steady as a verdict. "But justice and truth never can." Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a